Before we introduce our next guest, we've got some comments on this subject of affluenza in the studio audience. We're going to go right there in the middle.
Well, I find it interesting because affluenza has people putting their trust and their ease and fulfillment, or I don't know if I'm wording it correctly, on material things, which I think is wrong. Because at the end of the day, I think it's in community where people get their assurance and safety, where other people put it on having a lot of money in their bank account.
And at the corner of the audience there, we've got another comment.
Yeah, I just believe that influenza is self-destruction. I'm sure all of us in this room, if we look closely in our closet, we'll find something that we got as Christmas gift last year that we haven't touched.
All right, thank you very much. Well, our next guest is an expert on consumption and is here to help us figure out why we are a society of consumers. Anne McLennan is a professor at York University with a focus on media and culture. Thanks, Anne, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, you teach the history of this, how it all got wound up. Tell us where this begins for us in North America.
Okay, in North America, there's a big divide. And when we read the literature on early consumption, they always go back, or several scholars, Jean Baudrillard, Colin Campbell, even Arthur Berger in the States, talk about the Puritan inheritance. And to these scholars, and in much of the literature, they see a difference between consumerism and consumption in the rest of the world and in North America. Because Canada is lumped a little bit together with the United States, but it's a little bit different in Canada from the United States.
Because the Puritans were acting on a theological belief they had. On what they were supposed to do with all the resources that lay before them in North America. Tell us what their gut feeling was about that stuff.
Okay, well, the Puritans were outcasts, and they had to leave England. They were rejected as a group. Their beliefs were a little too extreme, and they rejected the Anglican Church. They first went to France, and several stayed there, but they did find their place in North America and set up their own settlements so they could practice their beliefs without any kind of resistance, harassment, or criticism. And their beliefs are based on, they go back basically to the Protestant Reformation. And there's a divide where there's a belief in the medieval Christian church, when everyone is together, that this life on earth is just a preparation for the afterlife. So gathering belongings and any accumulation of wealth wasn't of any real value. And that's a very strong belief in those times. As we move forward, there are changing beliefs, and the big divide between essentially good works and good grace is they are part of the group that believes in grace. Good works is working your way into heaven, acts of charity, tithes, that kind of thing.
So how did it get from that healthy enjoyment to now, it doesn't matter what you cut across, religious or not, in North America, overconsumption?
Okay, overconsumption, it's taken us a long time to get here, because if you go back a few decades, even in North America, we did not consume that much, right? There's a long period of sort of holding back in the early 20th century. People see the 20s as a very sort of a rich time, but it's not that much. If you look at different cities and sort of the poverty there, we have First World War. There was a lot of deprivation then. In the 20s and 30s, not that great, especially the 30s. So there's a big decades and decades of holding back on consuming. Now, it wasn't that extraordinary. It's just that the production had started to grow and that goods were available. They weren't available because of the war. They weren't available because of the Depression.
So decades and decades of pent-up something, yes. But the new generation, they're not decades old, and is the media the change factor?
Is the media the change factor, or is the media just encouraging it? I don't know. Like, it's a sort of a back and forth thing. Are we looking in the mirror? Are we causing this to happen? This is a dance you can do forever and say it's one thing or the other. There are a lot of different factors, right? There's, as you looked at before in your last interview, a decline in active religious practice, but there are also all kinds of things that have increased consumption. And we're at this sort of danger point of falling off some kind of cliff of overconsumption with the banks and everything that's going on now. But really, the consumption started with the generation that lived through the Depression and the wars and didn't have things and didn't have things, and then hit really the 50s and the 60s. Times were good.
Anne McLennan, thank you very much for your insights into the history of consumerism. Well, now it's time to find out what you think. Do you often feel tempted to buy more things even though you can live without them? Send us your answers by phone, email, Facebook, or Twitter, or leave us a video message on our website. We'd love to know what you think. So be part of the conversation. Our studio audience is taking a live vote, and we'll have those results when we come back. Coming up, we'll talk to Mark Powley, the author of Consumer Detox, on how we can't escape consumerism, but live, well, in the midst of it. He gives us a biblical perspective on the modern issue.